My daughter had only been gone 2 weeks when my son-in-law, Mark, stood in my living room, the very room where we'd held a quiet memorial service just days before, and announced his plans. He didn't ask. He stated, "This house is too big for just you, Mom. I'm going to need you to start packing." I've already talked to a realtor. The air grew thick with unspoken grief, but his words cut through it with the cold precision of a stranger. This wasn't the grieving widower. This was someone calculating, someone who saw my loss as an opportunity. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe family should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. I had always been generous with my family, perhaps too much so. After my husband passed away 12 years ago, leaving me financially secure, I devoted myself to supporting my 2 children. My son was independent, but my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, often struggled. They lived in a small apartment, dreaming of a house. When I found this property, a lovely, spacious home with a garden, I bought it outright, intending it as my home, but immediately invited Sarah and Mark to live with me, rent-free. It was my gift to them, a way to help them save and build their future, while also providing me with the comfort of having family close by, especially as I got older. I paid all the property taxes, insurance, and major repairs. Mark contributed sporadically to utilities, but the bulk of the financial responsibility fell to me. I didn't mind. It was for Sarah, and I loved having her and eventually their 2 young children under the same roof. My life revolved around their needs, my resources their safety net. But what she discovered next would force her to choose between family loyalty and self-preservation. I was Margaret, a widow in my late 60s. My life had been one of quiet routine, centered around my home and, until recently, my daughter Sarah and her family. My husband, Thomas, had been a prudent man, leaving me with a comfortable inheritance and a clear understanding of our assets. Our home, the one Mark was so casually discussing selling, was purchased entirely with my funds after Thomas's passing. The deed was in my name. Solely. I had made that decision deliberately, advised by my lawyer at the time, to ensure my financial stability was protected, while still providing a home for Sarah and Mark. It felt like a small, practical measure, never imagining I'd need it as a shield against my own family. Sarah knew the arrangement. She appreciated the security it offered them. Mark had always had a knack for seeing things in terms of what they could provide him. He was charming when he wanted to be, but beneath the surface lay a layer of entitlement I had often excused as youthful ambition or stress. He worked, but jobs came and went, and his financial planning seemed non-existent. Over the years, there were countless small requests for money, for car repairs, unexpected bills, even a sure-thing investment opportunity that vanished. I always helped because they were Sarah's family. I saw their reliance on me not as a burden, but as a way to feel useful, needed, especially after losing Thomas. They lived in my home, drove cars I'd helped purchase, and their children attended schools paid for, in part, by my contributions. It was, in my eyes, a partnership built on love and mutual support, albeit one where the financial scales tipped heavily in my favor. I had believed, naively perhaps, that love and gratitude were sufficient currency. I remember hearing Mark on the phone about a month before Sarah got sick. He was talking to someone, his voice low, almost secretive. "Yeah, well, once we're settled in Mom M's place permanently, it'll be smooth sailing. She's got deep pockets and frankly, she won't need all that space forever. Just gotta play the long game." I shook it off at the time, dismissing it as him being proud of having a stable home base. He often exaggerated their financial security to others. It wasn't until much later, replaying that conversation in my mind after his demands began, that the chilling implication sunk in. The long game. The words "start packing" echoed in the stunned silence of the living room. I looked at him, my son-in-law of 10 years, the father of my grandchildren, the man who had wept on my shoulder just days ago. My grief was raw, a gaping wound, and he was pouring salt into it. "Mark," I finally managed, my voice trembling, "this is my home. I bought this house." He waved a hand dismissively. Yeah, I know the paperwork. But Sarah and I lived here, we made a life here. This is our family home now. You're elderly, you don't need a big house like this. A nice little condo would be perfect for you. Easier to manage." His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was calculating. He wasn't grieving, he was planning. He had already moved past the monumental tragedy of losing his wife and was focused on the financial potential of my property. It was a betrayal so profound, so cold-blooded, that for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My initial reaction wasn't anger. It was a confused hurt so deep it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't just about the house. It was about my daughter's memory, about the life we had built under this roof, about my place in the family I had given everything to. I wanted to lash out, to scream that he was a vulture, but the words caught in my throat. The sheer audacity of his demand paralyzed me. I mumbled something about needing time, needing to think, needing him to leave. He pressed for a moment longer, suggesting realtors he'd apparently already researched, before finally, reluctantly, leaving me alone in the house that was suddenly under siege. Alone with my grief and a growing, terrifying suspicion. That night, sleepless, I went to my study and retrieved the heavy metal box where I kept important documents. My will, insurance papers, and the deed to the house. I held the deed in my hands, reading the official language, confirming my name as the sole owner. It felt less like a legal document and more like a lifeline. I locked the box and placed it somewhere Mark would never look. It was a small, instinctive act of self-preservation, the first flicker of a resolve that would need to burn bright. The days that followed were a blur of grief mixed with growing dread. Mark continued his campaign, subtly at first. He'd talk about the cost of maintaining the house, the burden it must be on me. He'd mention how much he needed a fresh start, how living here was too painful without Sarah, implying my presence wasn't helping. He even suggested that Sarah had wanted him to have the house. The gaslighting was insidious, preying on my vulnerability. He spoke of our plans for the future, plans that conspicuously excluded me from my home. I started writing things down. Every comment about selling the house, every mention of my future condo, every guilt trip about his financial state. I documented dates, times, and what was said. I felt a quiet, cold determination settle over me. I would not be forced out of my home. I would not let him dishonor my daughter's memory by turning her home into a quick cash grab. I called the lawyer who had handled my husband's estate and the purchase of the house years ago. Mr. Harrison was a kind, meticulous man. I scheduled an appointment, telling him only that I needed to discuss my property deed and current living situation. I didn't want to raise alarm bells with Mark, so I was careful when I left the house for the meeting, saying I was just running errands. Sitting in Mr. Harrison's office, handing him the deed, felt like taking off a heavy cloak of uncertainty. He reviewed the document, then looked at me calmly. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, "the deed is unequivocally in your name. You are the sole owner of the property. Your son-in-law has no legal claim to this house. Based on this document, relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of quiet anger. Mark hadn't just assumed. He had lied, or at least intended to coerce me into believing he had rights he didn't possess. Mr. Harrison explained my options. I could simply refuse to leave, which, given the deed, was legally my right. I could issue a formal letter via his office stating my ownership and Mark's lack of legal standing. If he refused to leave, I could pursue eviction, though Mr. Harrison advised caution given the circumstances and the grandchildren. We discussed setting clear boundaries, securing my finances further, and documenting everything rigorously. Assume everything you say, every message, could be used later, he advised. Be polite, be firm, and document. Back home, armed with legal knowledge and Mr. Harrison's advice, my perspective shifted. I was no longer just a grieving mother being bullied. I was a property owner with clear legal rights. The manipulation attempts became easier to spot, harder to tolerate. Mark's pressure intensified. He started bringing up financial crises, a sudden need for a large sum for Sarah's memorial expenses, which I had already paid for, or a supposed debt Sarah had incurred. He hinted that selling the house quickly was the only way to solve these problems. He even brought over his own mother, a woman I barely knew, who awkwardly suggested that I was being difficult and holding Mark back from grieving properly by not agreeing to move. It was a clumsy attempt at social pressure. I simply stated, calmly, that the house was my property and I had no intention of moving. Mark grew visibly frustrated. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen, his voice sharp, losing its veneer of politeness. "Look, Mom, we need this. Sarah would have wanted me to be taken care of. This house is the biggest asset we have. You're old. What do you need it for? I'm the one with 2 kids to raise." His eyes were hard, devoid of the grief-stricken look he wore for others. This was the second micro-cameo of the true antagonist, raw and undisguised entitlement. He didn't see me as a grieving mother or a generous benefactor. He saw me as an obstacle, a resource to be harvested. His words solidified my resolve. There would be no negotiation, no appeasement. He had shown me his true nature. Following Mr. Harrison's advice, I was methodical. I kept a detailed log of every conversation, every demand, every manipulative comment. I forwarded his increasingly demanding text messages and emails to a separate folder, cross-referencing them with my log. I quietly met with my financial advisor, explained the situation, and together we reviewed my accounts, ensuring everything was secure and solely in my name. We discussed setting up trusts for my grandchildren that bypassed their father entirely, ensuring their future wasn't tied to his instability or his potential to squander resources. I changed the locks on all the external doors, explaining to Mark that I felt unsafe being alone after Sarah's passing, which was partly true, and that I needed more security. I didn't give him a new key. He complained, but I held firm. I also installed a small, discreet security camera system covering the main entry points, just for peace of mind, I told him. It felt increasingly like I was fortifying a castle under siege, only the invader was living inside the walls. My preparation wasn't fueled by vengeance, but by a quiet, burning need to protect myself, my home, and the legacy I intended for my grandchildren, not for the man who would discard me so readily. I realized the depth of his plan wasn't just to get the house. It was to strip me of my independence and resources, perhaps even control my future. This realization hardened my resolve further. The turning point came a few weeks later. Mark had been pushing harder, suggesting we list the house, just to see what it's worth, and insisting I sign some preliminary paperwork from a realtor he'd chosen. He left the documents on the kitchen counter, expecting me to sign them without question. I picked them up. They weren't preliminary. They included an exclusive listing agreement and a disclosure form that implied both our consent was required to sell the property, listing him as a co-owner by implication, despite the deed. It was a blatant attempt to mislead me and create a false legal basis for his claim. This was the smoking gun. He wasn't just hoping I'd move, he was actively trying to legally entangle me and the property based on lies. I took the documents straight to Mr. Harrison. "This," Mr. Harrison said, tapping the misleading disclosure form, "is significant. This shows intent to deceive and defraud." He explained that attempting to list a property he didn't own, using documents that falsely represented ownership, was a serious matter. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore, it bordered on attempted fraud. This gave us significant legal leverage. Mr. Harrison drafted a letter. It was concise, formal, and left no room for interpretation. It stated my sole ownership of the property, citing the deed book and page number, informed Mark that he had no legal right to list, sell, or encumber the property, demanded he cease and desist all actions implying co-ownership or attempting to sell, and formally notified him that he was a guest in my home and that his continued presence was contingent on respecting my ownership and boundaries. It also mentioned the potential legal consequences of attempting to misrepresent ownership or coerce me. The legal weapon, based entirely on the quiet power of the deed I had secured years ago, was ready. Mark, in his overconfidence and desperation, had made a crucial mistake, underestimating my awareness and my willingness to seek professional help. He genuinely seemed to believe he could bully or trick me into giving him the house. Mr. Harrison's office sent the letter via certified mail, with a copy delivered by a process server. The process server arrived on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't present. I had gone to a friend's house to avoid the inevitable scene. According to the report, Mark was blindsided. He reportedly went from disbelief to sputtering rage as he read the letter and saw the official court envelope. He immediately called me, his voice shrill with panic and fury. "What is this, Mom? What have you done? You can't do this. This is our house." I listened, calm and quiet. "Mark," I said, my voice steady, "I haven't done anything except state the facts. The deed is in my name. This is my home." He ranted, he threatened, he tried guilt. "Sarah would be ashamed of you." But I didn't engage. I simply repeated that the house was mine, and he needed to respect that. I ended the call politely but firmly. The shockwave went through our small, extended family quickly. Mark, in his desperation, tried to rally support, painting himself as the victim, an innocent widower being thrown out by a cruel, wealthy mother-in-law. But the truth, backed by the legal documents, was undeniable. Mr. Harrison had ensured the letter was clear about ownership. Neighbors who had known I bought the house were confused by Mark's narrative. My son, who lived out of state but was aware of Mark's character, was appalled and immediately supportive of me. Mark's attempts at social pressure backfired as the facts emerged. He became increasingly erratic. He refused to leave the house, claiming I couldn't just kick him out. But Mr. Harrison was prepared. Based on Mark's refusal to acknowledge my ownership and his prior attempts to misrepresent the property, we filed for an expedited hearing for unlawful detainer, essentially a legal process to remove someone who is trespassing on a property they don't own after being given notice to leave. The court date was set quickly. Mark, representing himself initially, arrived looking pale and agitated. I sat with Mr. Harrison, quiet and composed. The judge reviewed the deed, the letter from Mr. Harrison's office, and Mark's admitted actions regarding attempting to list the property. Mark tried to argue that it was the family home, that he had contributed to utilities, that Sarah had considered it theirs. The judge listened patiently, then cut to the chase. "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, his voice firm, "while I sympathize with your loss, the legal ownership of this property is clear and undisputed. The deed shows Mrs. Peterson as the sole owner. Your contributions to utilities do not grant you ownership rights. Furthermore, your attempts to market this property and present yourself as an owner, documented here, are concerning. You have no legal right to reside in this house against Mrs. Peterson's wishes." The judge ordered Mark to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Mark was stunned into silence. He finally understood. The simple, quiet fact of the deed had dismantled his entire scheme. He had lost. In the immediate aftermath, the house felt empty, but also quiet and safe. Mark left within the court-ordered timeframe, taking only his personal belongings. The children were staying with his parents temporarily, a situation I knew I would need to address for their sake. But for now, I focused on securing my space. The legal victory felt less like a triumph and more like the restoration of order. The court's decision confirmed my rights, undeniable and absolute. Mark faced consequences. His reputation within the family and community was damaged, and he was left without the financial windfall he had so callously pursued. He had to find his own housing and face his financial reality without my home as a fallback. My life settled into a new rhythm. With clear boundaries established, I began to heal properly, no longer under the constant stress of his manipulation. The house was mine, secure, a refuge built on my own resources and now protected by my own resolve. There was no room for reconciliation. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. But in that quiet, secure home, I found a deep sense of peace and self-respect. I had stood up for myself, not with aggression, but with quiet strength and strategic action, guided by the truth documented on a piece of paper. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.